Welcome again to Cottage Talk. I am Russ Goldman. Joining me right now is Tony Gold. This is a special episode of Cottage Talk. We are live on YouTube and on the Cottage Talk Facebook page. And it is another episode of the State of Fulham. And it is entitled, Should It Be Decision Time on Marco Silva's Future? And the title itself might be a little misleading because this isn't going to be an episode where it's quote unquote Silva out. What it is going to be discussion on his contract and also on Fulham's play this season. So it's not going to be as simple as that. It is going to deal with the bigger picture of the contract, what it means to Fulham so far this season, what it means to in the future, and what the Cons should do about it. It's just going to be a talk about it because after what happened on Friday night, I got to be honest with you, I still can't stomach really having a good discussion on that, Tony. So disappointing. I will do a show or shows on that match, but I think this is a bigger issue that we need to talk about. So again, thank you so much for joining me today to have a discussion on Marco Silva's contract and on his future, to be honest with you.
No, absolute pleasure, and looking forward to getting into it.
Okay, so let's get into it, Tony, and let's start here because I said this over the summer, and I continue to say this. Win, lose, or draw, the results are the results, that we've seen so far. Fulham are where they are. This is who they are right now. But the question I have is, do you think Marco Silva's contract situation has affected the team this season? And I'll share my thoughts quickly, and then I'll go to you, because when I look at how they're playing, listen, there have been some good moments. Has it affected them bringing in players that wanted to come here because of the uncertainty of his contract? Do Fulham have the team that they need to have to compete this season? And does the contract factor into all this? So I want to get your thoughts. We're just talking specifically about Marco's contract and the fact that it's up in the summer. Has it affected what we're watching on the pitch? We'll talk about the pitch in a separate part of this show, but I just want to talk about the contract itself.
Sure. Look, my opinion on it, Russ, is that no, I don't think it's affecting the team, because you're talking about professional footballers that are paid, an incredible amount of money to do their job, to do their jobs. And to be honest with you, what goes on off the pitch shouldn't be affecting anything that happens on it. Where I think that the situation is a bit muddy and cloudy and where it may have affected us sort of, short term, is the fact that by Marco Silva not agreeing or signing or in talks to sign a new contract, it means that the Khans haven't been too forthright in wanting to invest in the team and in what Marco Silva may want moving forward. Because obviously, if he's not here at the end of next season, they're going to buy in all these players. And then, if a new manager comes in, some might be surplus to requirements, some might not fit the new manager, etc. So in that regard, I think that has absolutely affected certainly our summer transfer market without any shadow of a doubt. Yep. The fact that we left everything so late, the fact that we've taken a £40 million gamble on a player that so far is basically where Smith Rowe was this time last year in terms
exactly
of
where he exactly.
Yeah, so I think in the main, yes, I think we haven't brought in the right players that we needed, and I think that that is starting to show massively in our performances, and the fact that we are so light, in particularly up front. We always discussed it. We've always talked about the fact that what happens if Muniz and Raul get injured, or if they're not available, or whatever. What's the plan? Where are we going? And that was a huge error. When we sold Mitrovic, that he should have been replaced immediately. And we are now seeing the downside of not doing that and the repercussions of all of that, because we're having to put, square pegs in round holes, and you can't afford to do that at this level of football.
See, I'm there with you. And the more I'm focusing on is not the play on the pitch, because I don't think the players are thinking about Marco's contract. What I'm looking at is what you just brought to the table. And I'm just going to mentioned that as well. I think that potentially, because Marco's in the last year of his contract, maybe the Cons were not investing as much as they should have. Maybe there's something going on behind the scenes. I don't know. But I think that they have not invested in the players that are needed. Was there something going on this summer? He wanted certain players. They were only willing to invest so much. Listen, I think the contract situation, the uncertainty of it, I think affected the recruitment. That's whether it is from the Cons or was it from players not wanting to come here. I think that both are culpable. I'm talking about Marco himself not signing a new deal, or maybe, I don't know, maybe the Cons have not brought it to him at this point. I don't know what the situation is because, like I said, I haven't seen that they've offered him a new deal. So I was looking for some information before we went live. But the uncertainty of his contract and the fact that the Cons really did not invest as much as they should have, I think, Tony, I think that contract situation is like this cloud hanging over the team.
Yeah, look, I think Gary's made some good points there in the chat, but I think that also you've got to think about the facets to this. There is a lot of facets. I'm sure there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that we're not privy to, and that we don't hear conversations, all the time ongoing, and we know the sort of brutal side of football. It's not pretty really behind the scenes. And I think maybe the whole question is, since the Khan's tenure, yes, they've put in a beautiful new stand and they've invested in that, and the fans are very grateful, and it's lovely to see. But the bottom line is the investment needs to be on the pitch. And I think that we said it, even though we had our best finish in terms of points wise last season, we've kind of stagnated, and Silva seems to be unable to get over this hurdle of being able to push the team forward and take it beyond that, sort of mid-table, just outside the European places, situation. And so maybe they feel in their mind, the Khans, that he might have taken it as far as he, possibly can in that regard. And that actually doesn't matter how much they invest or what sort of players they bring in. Maybe he just hasn't got the coaching ability and managerial nous to take it where it needs to go, Russ. And I think we've seen that on so many occasions, certainly in the last couple of seasons where Fulham have tailed off. And, we saw it in massive patches the other night and the other week against Aston Villa and Bournemouth, where, we've got ourselves into a position where we've taken the lead in both games and yet still managed to finish in a 3-1 defeat in both situations.
Right.
So there is so much to sort of, strip back and look at the reasons why that's happening. And for me, it's quite obvious, but everyone's going to have a different opinion on it, Russ.
Right.
And ultimately, at the moment, the bottom line is we did not invest in the summer transfer market as well as we should have. That is the bottom line.
See, I'm with you 100%, Tony, and I shared Gary's comments. I might bring them back in just a second, and and I'll just share this because I just want to be clear on this. Gary says I prefer the Khans to go and Silva to stay, and I certainly see where he's going on that. And for those, and again, I have my own personal critics that think that I always agree with the Khans because the Khans have been on Cottage Talk. You know me well, my friend. That is not true whatsoever. In fact, I'll say it once again. A couple seasons ago, I actually put it out there that I wanted the Khans to sell Fulham Football Club. It's been 2 years since I said that. I don't feel that strongly about it. If someone was to come in that could invest money wisely and take us to the next level, I certainly wouldn't be against if they wanted to sell the club. But I was very strong with that because I understand Gary's sentiments here. They've done a lot of good things, but they've done some things that I'm not crazy about as a supporter. My biggest thing is invest in the club. You can invest in the stand. That's great. Invest in the team. Make the team better. I understand the rules and regulations, but there are ways to manipulate the rules to get players in. So to go along with this conversation about his contract, because I think it all goes back to the recruitment. That's where I wanted to really dive into. It's the recruitment over the summer. It's not even just the summer, Tony. It's the recruitment for several years under Silva. It's always been late. Why has it always been late? I have my feelings on it. I think the Cons wait until the end to get good deals. That's how I feel on that. But I'm going to just flip it on the other side, because we're talking about Marco and his contract situation and how that might be, say, affecting him and affecting what's going on. I want to talk about Marco's comments, though, because, again, his comments this summer were pretty revealing. It goes to recruitment. He was openly critical of the summer recruitment, Tony. So I'm going to pose it to you this way. If you are the Cons, how would you have felt to see Marco's comments? I know that some of these comments with some of the managers and coaches over here, they would have been sacked. They would have been fired for some of the comments he made. So what do you make of that?
Well, we saw it at Nottingham Forest. What happens when
Exactly.
you cross the line in terms of that? But look, there's obviously tension behind the scenes. But just going back to your point, Russ, before we come on to that, I think what's really important, it's not just about the Cans investing money, because look, ultimately the Cans are one of the wealthiest owners in the Premier League. You know, the reality is that we've got a director of football who's never present, right? He's never present. He comes out, you know, with these ridiculous comments every time Fulham win. You don't hear from him when Fulham lose. You don't hear from him about, you know, what's happening with player recruitment, structures, foundations. Our director of football is the Scarlet Pimpernel, right? He's never around. He's got interests in other things that are far more important, and he just doesn't take that role seriously, Russell. And I think that's the biggest problem at Fulham Football Club, is that we don't have proper football men in the positions of power making football decisions and that understand what the Premier League is all about. And if you look at a club like Brighton, for example, right? Yep. You know, they run a fantastic enterprise down at Brighton Football Club. The Blooms get it absolutely spot on.
They do.
Because they're invested in it. They take it seriously. They do their due diligence. They look at players. They've got a great scouting system in place. And to be perfectly honest, you know, we've got prehistoric dinosaurs in positions now at Fulham Football Club. Brian Talbot, McIntosh. It needs a complete overhaul, and it needs a complete refresher from top to bottom. You know, Tom Kearney's coming to the end of his career, right? Been around it donkey's years. Get him in a position of power as he comes to the end of his career. Maybe wants to retire, move on, whatever. Get him into a position at Fulham Football Club where he can, you know, use his experience and use his football knowledge to promote the football qualities within the football club. Marco Silva, his comments in the summer were for me, struck me as a man very frustrated. Okay? Yep. Very frustrated by the fact that for some reason, he must have had several players lined up in his mind in terms of who he wanted to bring in, who he wanted to sign. And clearly, the Cans have vetoed it. And for whatever reason, you know, not gone with it. So we don't know what goes on behind the scenes. But like I said, the bottom line for me and the common denominator in all of this is Tony Khan. And that's the reality, because he has the responsibility. Marco Silva has to report to the director of football.
Correct.
Where is he? Where is he?
Correct.
Where has he been? What is he doing? What is his role? And that's the big question mark, Russell.
It's actually a great point, and I actually shared this. I'll share it again from Alan, because you mentioned Brighton. We could also, believe it or not, talk about Bournemouth. Look at how Bournemouth are being run too. So Bournemouth have 11,000 seat Vitality Stadium, okay? We have, what, 3 times that? Well, not 3 times. Well, you get where I'm going on that. But they get it right. They know what they're doing. They invest their money well. And it's a good point. At some point, don't you look at yourself, I'm talking about as a club, and say, this isn't working. Do we need to try something different? Do we need to change what people are doing? Make changes. Listen, I'm not advocating people getting sacked or anything like that, but do you need to make some changes on how you do your business? And because we're talking about, listen, I'm not a big fan of Brighton, but they have definitely done it right. And then you have to look at Bournemouth, and there are other clubs. I'm not going to say that other B team because I can't stand that other B team in Hounslow. I'm not mentioning them because I don't give them the credit that I'm going to give these other two. But this tussle between the Khans and Silva, I think, is real. I think that's one of the reasons why we don't have a new contract for him. But I agree with what you're saying that, listen, people have told me that Tony Khan is at this point really not involved that much, Tony. But you know what? I think he still has to make the final call. So when you have someone that has other businesses that I think are taking precedent, why is he the one with the final call? But, and I think that's the issue that we're having.
What experience has Tony Khan got as a director of football? What does he know about football, Russ? The answer is absolutely nothing. I mean, it's like a top firm of solicitors employing me to become a barrister, right? And I go in and start, working on behalf of people in the courts. It's a joke because I wouldn't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm talking about. And it's the same thing. But because obviously his father owns the football club, let's get Son in, let him do this, let him do that. But the reality is Tony Khan has absolutely no football knowledge whatsoever, doesn't understand football, doesn't know football, wouldn't know a footballer if it came and smacked him in the face, right? Wouldn't have a clue what is going on. But yet he is somebody that is dealing with agents, with football clubs, with players, with scouts, with all of these people, and actually not having a clue. Probably watched a few YouTube videos of Kevin and thought, yep, there's a player, we'll sign him for £35 million. Because that's what it looks like to me, Russ. Yeah. That's what it looks like. Who's gone to watch Kevin and thought this player is worth £40 million? Who? So who's made that decision?
That's the question, my friend. Who is making the decisions? Like I said, that's what it's coming down to. Why, and we'll talk about this. Why is the young Swedish striker Jonah not getting a look in, Tony? It sounds like to me, we're going back to the recruitment. Now, again, this is my theory on this, that he was not Silva's pick, that he was a pick of someone else thrown on to him. And that is probably a factor in this.
I'm not having that, Russ, as a manager. I'm a manager.
No, I agree with you.
I am managing this football club. All right. I need the players that I want to get the success that I need on the football pitch. If somebody's throwing players at me and telling me I need to sign this, I'm making a decision. I'm either saying absolutely no and moving on, or I'm saying if I can't run this club the way that I need to run it as the manager, I'm off. I'm going. What's the point?
Right.
And so that's where I think Marco Silva is in his head at the moment is, well, my contract's running out. I obviously don't have as much of a say as I would like, potentially. And so why would I sign a new contract at a football club where I can't bring the players in that I want, and I'm having players put on me and being told I need to sign them? And I think that's where the block is, Russ, at the moment.
Okay. And like I said, I think that this summer, like no other summer I've seen, like I said, to go down to the wire to make signs. I've never seen that before with any club. I can remember any club doing this. I'm sure that there have been other clubs that have done this, but Fulham have certainly never gotten to that level. And like you said, they did spend money on Kevin, but now you and I, we're looking back at it and listen, I wanted to work out with Kevin, but right now I'm here to tell you that Jaquazi looks light years ahead of Kevin. And it's not supposed to be that way. Jaquazi comes right on. You can already see where he is. I said to you before, my expectation for Emile Smith-Rowe and for Kevin, because this goes to recruitment, I expected them to be what Josh King's doing right now. Josh King is on there, Tony. You feel confident watching him that he's going to make things happen. Do you feel confident that Emile Smith-Rowe, every time he goes out there, even though I'm still for him being a part of this team, being in the future of this team, do you feel confident he's going to make a difference every time he's on the pitch. Kevin the same way. We got to give Kevin more time. But right now, these are your two big money signings, and they have not at this point lived up to the money that was spent on them. And I think that's disappointing.
We had £70 million worth of talent apparently sitting on our bench on Friday night.
I mean, that's insane. That's insane.
And I think that's more than the whole Bournemouth team put together, if I'm not mistaken. But, you know, that's the issue. At the moment, you know, Fulham broke their record last season in signing Smith Rowe. You know, to date, that hasn't worked out. Smith Rowe hasn't completed a full 90 minutes for us yet, I don't think. And then you've got Kevin, who then beat the previous record of Smith Rowe, also sitting on the bench, unable to break in or get in at the moment. And when he has played and when he has got in, he's looked bang average. Yeah. And I'm being you know, a little bit easy on him in that regard, because I don't think he's even been bang average. I think he's been poor.
Yeah.
So the reality is, at the moment, it's not working out. Marco Silva is not going to change the way he sets up the team and how he plays and whatever. He's got it in his mind that this is it. And so ultimately, you're looking at the bench, you're looking at other options, and you're thinking, you know, we don't have a centre forward. You know, with Muniz and Raul out injured, and hopefully one of them will be back, you know, after the international break. But if not, what are we going to do? Carry on filling holes, putting, you know, square pegs in round holes? Are we going to see this 19-year-old superstar from Bayern Munich, who's had every opportunity to play a game, you know, since, had a chance to throw him in against Cambridge United in League Two, didn't do it? There are more questions than answers, Russell, and that's the problem. So at the moment, no one other than Marco Silva knows what's going through his head. No one.
Right. And that's the situation. We don't know what is going on with Marco. Does he want to sign with Fulham beyond this summer? Is that a factor? Like I said, I think it's a factor in players wanting to come. But I also think, as we're talking about, the bigger issue is this relationship between the Khans and Marco, getting him the players that he needs with recruitment. They simply failed, Tony. Regardless of what happens the rest of the season, it failed to take the team that they had that was really intact and not add to it earlier than they did. They failed. Now, like I said, Fulham could still have a good season. They really could. They could turn around. They've got difficult matches coming up. You and I both know that. We've talked about it. It could turn around, but it didn't need to be this way. They failed this summer. And like I said, that's why I wanted to bring up the contract situation, because I think that's part of the situation, but it's also the bigger part is this dynamic, as you talked about, with who's calling the shots and Marco Silva. Who's calling the shots? Is it Tony? Is it Tony? Is it, you know, like you said, is it someone else? Is it Tony? Regardless, there are issues, and that contract is a major issue. And that's going to lead to talk about, before we talk about really Marco himself with, you know, his situation managing Fulham, I do want to ask you this question, because we're talking about Marco. So I'm going to put us both in the shoes of the Khans, owners of Fulham Football Club. What should the Khans do at this moment, Tony? You've got this situation with Marco. 2 years ago, I believe it was October 23rd, Marco finally signed his new contract with Fulham Football Club. So that's why I'm looking at this international break as an opportunity. So here's the question. You're Shahid Khan. Do you go to Marco and say, listen, Marco, let's get something done right now during the international break. Let's instill your future now, and we will invest moving forward. Should that be what they do? I'm curious your views. What would you do if you were Shahid Khan?
I think that, well, first of all, they have to be proactive in everything from this point forward. They have to be proactive. Now, as I said to you, are they taking this seriously? Is this where their loyalties lie? Because obviously they've got a lot of other ventures and stuff going on with the wrestling, with the NFL, etc., etc. So my question is that it has to be split into two. And if you're asking me what the Khans can do at the moment in terms of Fulham Football Club on the football pitch, absolutely nothing. because they can't do anything until January anyway. And even if then, we need to see how the land lies.
Right.
So what I'd be saying is they need to sit down, like you rightly said, with Marco Silva sooner rather than later.
Right.
But all the indicators, Russ, are pointing to me, and from what I'm seeing, and having seen Marco Silva's body language on Friday night,
Yep.
Is that I think he's done. In his mind, I think he's done.
See, I agree with Gary and I agree with you. So that's why I'm bringing this topic to light here.
Yeah.
What should the Khans do?
And I think that maybe the Khans have maybe sort of switched off as well a little bit from it, and are thinking actually maybe they do want to get out, and maybe they are behind the scenes. Maybe they are looking for a suitable buyer or somebody that's going to step in and stuff like that. But it's always this, be careful what you wish for situation,
of course,
and stuff like that. And it's always the unknown is always difficult. But the ultimate question is, and I think that, Marco Silva, we love him as a manager. He's done
yep.
great things within within the constraints of what he has to work with. And I think we have to be very clear about that.
Absolutely.
I think the bigger question now, Russ, is Marco Silva the man with the right investment, with the right backing, with the right people in place? Is he the manager that can take us, this football club, this group of players, to the next level? We're
going to get to that right next, my friend. I want to really dive into that. Definitely, that was going to be the second part of the show. Definitely that is the big question that we'll be talking about next. But I definitely wanted to focus on the Khans, okay? Because I think that this is a pivotal time for them. Right now, I think is a pivotal time, decision time. That's why I said Marco Silva. That's why I started the show with the title, because I think this is decision time, not just for Marco, but for the Khans. It's about his future. What do you do? What do you do at this point?
I don't think the Khans are taking it seriously. I really don't. Not as seriously as the fans and the supporters that are invested in it emotionally. Every single week, the fans that turn up on a Friday night in the pouring rain at Bournemouth, and pay good money to watch that rubbish. And it was rubbish. Let's make no bones about it. It was shocking performance.
Yep.
And they're the ones that are invested, and then they're not getting in return, other than a lovely new stand that no one can afford to sit in anyway. They're not getting the right investment in terms of looking at it from a player perspective, in terms of what we can invest in and replace. We lost Polina and Mitrovic, two, whatever people might not think, world-class players, very, very good players. We didn't replace them, Russ. We haven't replaced them. We've replaced them with second-rate players.
Right.
Players that can come in and do a job, but not to the level that they were when they were performing at their levels.
Neither one.
Right. And that's the reality. And that's why we've dropped off. That's why we're not, that's why we haven't pushed on. That's why we've sort of hit a leveler. And this season, to not be able to push on in a Premier League that is going to be very competitive, far more competitive than last year, Fulham are in danger of being dragged in to a situation that really could have and should have been avoided.
Totally agree, Tony. And I don't like to talk about relegation, but we might be talking about it. And like I said, it doesn't need to be there. But one final thing before we move on and really dive into talking about Marco's future, because I really want to spend a lot of time on that. Half the show was really to talk about his contract, but now I want to focus on something else. But before we do, so the reason why I brought up the Khans, and again, we're talking about, could they sell? I don't know. I've heard rumblings over the 2 or 3 years. But say they're still in place and they're still going to be in place. And like you said, I want them to take it more seriously. I agree with all that. So should they consider right now in this discussion, knowing everything that's happened in the summer with Marco, I heard Tony Khan say he wants Marco to be his manager, basically, I'm paraphrasing, for life. Well, hopefully, that would be something that he wants, and I don't disagree with wanting something like that. However, I'm going to put it to you this way. If Marco has made it, that doesn't want to be here. Like we're getting all this indicators. We got people tweeting us. We're talking about, we don't know if Marco really wants to be here past this year. If you are the Cons, don't you have plan B ready to go? I know no one wants to talk about it, but do you have plan B ready to go? Do you have someone in mind ready to go?
Who would they have in mind, Russ? Who at the moment?
There's only one name that comes to mind. And I talked to someone about it, and it's going to be a name that many are going to know. I'm not saying it's the right person. I'm just saying, if you're asking me for a name, I'll give you a name. It's Liam Senior. That's the one name that I have on my mind. Now, I'm just telling you, I've talked to a few people. They've thrown that name to me as well. Doing very well. I know I can see you shaking your head, but you're asking me. But they should have some plan B ready to go. That's my feeling.
Obviously, yes. That any owner that is questioned around their manager being here or not being here would, in the back of their mind, you would have thought, have some contingency plans in place. If we're going to go from Marco Silva to Liam Senior, then I think we're in a far worse place than we need to be. But ultimately, Russ, I would look at it and think, if Marco Silva decides to walk at the end of the season by not signing a contract because he wants to go and chase his European dream or whatever it is that he wants, then I actually think that it would be a pivotal moment in Fulham's history about their next manager. And for me, there are probably not even a handful of managers that I would be approaching and going after. And let me tell you something, right?
Yep.
Bournemouth, with the greatest respect to them, in my opinion, are a smaller club than Fulham.
That's right.
And they have a manager that, in my opinion, is far better than the football club that he's currently managing at. Yeah. And if I was going to go for a manager,
you would go for Areola. You go for
100%.
And I would do that in a heartbeat too. I would do that in a heartbeat too.
100%.
If you're telling me that they could get him, forget about Liam Senior and all that. I would go for Areola. 10 times out of 10. I'll give you a name that was thrown to me that I would not ever touch. It's Ange Postecoglou. I wouldn't go there. Someone said that to me. I'm like, no way. Or Eric Ten Hag. No, I'm not going for Eric Ten Hag. That's why it's difficult.
You don't want to go after these has-beens that have, come up because they've done well in the Dutch league or Scottish Premier League or whatever. These guys have been found out. They've been found out, and ultimately, you want to go after a manager that shows that he's got the right technical abilities, the nous, the abilities to change games, the ability to get that extra 10% out of footballers who look organised and structured. And Areola ticks every single box. He's shown it with Bournemouth, working with a small budget, small ground, small fan base, and he has proved his worth for us. And he's going to be a well sought after manager. And I could see him actually managing Manchester United in the next year and a half, the way it's going.
I could too.
But he's somebody that's the kind of caliber that I would be looking at.
Okay, see, I'm there with you. Okay, I'm totally there with you. I want to just talk about this comment from Alan, because Alan, I could speak a little to this, and I know you tweeted. There's a goal for you. You had another comment. Russ, do the Cons run the Jags in the same way at arm's length? I will say that they do, but it's a little bit different. I wouldn't say that it's at arm's length. I would just say that they run the business like an NFL team, meaning they run Fulham similarly. And I just don't think you can run a team in the Premier League the way that you run a team in the NFL. They're two completely different leagues, business models, and I think the Cons approach it the same way, Alan. So it's not that they keep it at arm's length. It's just that they run it the same way, in my opinion. And I think that affects what we see on the pitch. They're always looking for deals. They're used to that in the NFL. I know this for a fact that they're close to the owners here in New England. And I feel like they've modeled their businesses after the Kraft family. And the Kraft family, they run their businesses conservatively. I'll just leave it at that. And I think that the Cons do it a similar way. They're looking to win the business deal rather than get the best player. That's what always frustrates me, Alan, and to you, Tony. I've said this to you time and time again. I feel that the Cons' heart is in the right place, but they are also in this situation where they are playing this Masters of the Universe game and they want to win the deal. That's why we get all the deals at the end of the transfer window, Tony. They want to win the deal instead of getting the best player. Very frustrating. So, Alan, yes, they run it similarly, but the models are completely different. They're completely different. Premier League and NFL, nothing like each other, but they run it the same way, Alan. I think that's the best way to describe that. And our friend Chris shares this. Now, he's a Liverpool supporter. Are you okay with FSG? Because I know many Liverpool supporters are not, but okay. I still think your chief problem is your ownership. I think it's a factor here, Tony.
Yeah, look, I mean, Gary, Chris, Warren, they all make very good points. And look, ultimately, as I'll go back to the, and Warren says it there, I'll go back to what I said earlier. At the end of the day, we are talking about football. Okay, you were talking about running a football club in the top tier of English football in this country. You need to have football people in positions of power that understand the game, that have been around it at that level, that are experienced, and that can bring that knowledge and that know-how to the table. And at Fulham Football Club, like I said earlier, we have some prehistoric dinosaurs that have been around it far too long, that are completely out of touch with how the game's changed, how football in Europe's changed, how players have changed. And our recruitment is nowhere near the levels it needs to be. We have a director of football who is virtually non-existent.
Yep.
In my opinion, doesn't take it seriously. In my opinion, does not have a clue what he's doing. And that together with everything else is a recipe for what we've got, which is inconsistency. And at times, looking at it from someone on the outside looking in, complete and utter chaos. It just looks like complete chaos, Russ. Well, and that's what we've got.
It's funny. I agree with that. And we've already talked about Brighton, and I mentioned Bournemouth. I'm going to give you something that Bournemouth did that was, at the time, thought to be crazy, insane, okay? They took a chance here, Tony, a major chance, and they got destroyed for it. They got rid of their manager, and they brought in Areola. Look how that worked out. That was a gamble to many, right? I remember at the time, they were getting destroyed for it. They made the right call. They absolutely, if you look at Bournemouth, look at the players that they brought in. They made a lot of great decisions. The only bad decision I think they made was bringing in Scott Parker, but we've both made that bad decision.
Yeah, look, most decisions that football clubs make are risky, right? You have to take risk,
right,
to sometimes, benefit from the rewards. And, our manager doesn't take risks on the pitch, Russ. He doesn't take risks, which is why we get the same record pretty much every single time that we watch us, because he doesn't divert away from what he's comfortable with. Yeah.
Well, we're going to get there, man.
Yeah. And that's how our football club is run. That the owners don't take risks because they don't know how to. They're not qualified to be able to make those decisions. And I go back to it again, right? And this is an example. When I watched Semenya when he was playing for Bristol City back in the day when he came to Fulham and he absolutely ripped us up.
I remember that.
If I'm a scout at a football club and I've got the responsibility of scouting players, let's say, for example, in this country, because they've got scouts that cover different areas, etc.
Yep.
And I'm looking at Semenya and I'm looking at all his qualities and all his attributes. And I'm thinking to myself, do you know what? There is a future Premier League footballer who does X, Y, and Z really, really well. We can get him at a decent price, and he is going to be a player that we can work with, we can develop, we can improve. Let's take a risk on him and gamble, and let's bring him in, as opposed to looking at some player that's been playing in Spain or Sweden or wherever, and you're thinking to yourself, right, knowing what you need in the Premier League, it's all about players that have the right attributes. So there's a player that I don't know if we were interested in or not. But the question is, why are we not identifying those players and looking at them and picking them up? Why are we losing these players? And that to me is because the structure within, the scouting system and the recruitment system at Fulham isn't working. It's not right. It's just simply not right.
Right. And to be honest with you, to be successful, right? We've talked about that. My father talked about this too. To make money, you have to spend money. That was his. He would always say that to me, Tony. But you brought up something really interesting. To really get ahead in business or get ahead, you need to take risk, and you need to be willing to take a risk, and you can be rewarded for it. Bournemouth have proven that out. Brighton have proven that out. Yeah, I'm going to say it. Brentford, it has proven out. I can't believe I'm going to say it. But even though I can't stand them, the moves they've made have worked for the most part. They have figured it out. They might not have been able to figure it out this season, but for the most part, and then you have our situation where they really are risk averse. They're risk averse. And then you have a manager that is really, in my opinion, extremely risk averse. And we're going to talk about that next. So, Tony, final thoughts about talking about the contract situation. Then we're going to move on to talk about the actual situation with Marco Silva that we really want to get into.
Yeah, look, I think we've covered it, and I've had some great comments on it, and ultimately, it's in the hands of a few people, and that ultimately is with the Khans, with Marco Silva. Chris made a comment about starting to show his frustrations. He was showing his frustrations well before Friday. There's something clearly not right behind the scenes, and it's obvious. You can see it, you can smell it, you can sense it, and ultimately, as I said, the Khans need to sit down with Silva sooner rather than later.
Yep.
Thrash out whatever needs to be thrashed out, and if they can't reach an agreement, and if they decide that actually this is the end of the road, then like you said, they need to have a plan B in place now.
That's what I'm saying.
Right now, ready to act on it as and when they need to, and not play this waiting game and waiting to see what happens, because it will be too late by then.
That's my whole point. The longer this situation with this contract goes on, Tony, the harder I think it gets for the club. That's why I'm putting this out there, that they need to be doing this, as you said, sooner than later. A decision needs to be made, because they can't continue to have this cloud hanging over them. They need to figure out, I'm talking about as a club, what they're going to do and what Marco's going to do. They got to come to an agreement there, whether it's he's going to sign a new contract or if he's not, and then they have to decide what they're going to do after that. And I think that's what's interesting about this whole situation, and disappointing on many ways, because I was hoping he'd have a contract all ironed up before the season began, and I still feel that it is this just hanging over us, and that's why I'm hoping there's some kind of situation that comes to an end one way or another. I hope Marco signs a new deal. But coming up next, we are actually going to focus on Marco Silva and how far can he actually take Fulham. Okay, Tony. So now we've put all the contract situation, we put that aside. The other part of this discussion I wanted to be talking about Marco Silva and his tactics, and talk about, really, do you think Marco Silva has taken Fulham as far as he can? Is this the level? Are we simply a mid-table club? Is his tactics limited to taking us to another level? Is he too stubborn to take us into the top six? Because he rarely changes his tactics in game, Tony. Never changes his formation, except for a few occasions where it's basically over at that point. He has done that, but I don't know, maybe a handful of times. For the most part, his plan B is his plan A. So I'm asking you the question. I think this is really what I get into it. Do you think Marco Silva has taken Fulham as far as he can?
Right at this point, given the tools that he's got to work with and the current situation that he's in, I believe that, yes, he has definitely taken us as far as he can. I can't see anything to suggest moving forward from this point that he's going to change the way that he manages, the way that he sets the team up, the way that he approaches things technically, tactically. I don't see where he's going to change in order to take us to the next level or to improve on where we are. So at this moment in time, yes, I do believe that Marco Silva, with the tools that he has at his disposal, has definitely taken us as far as he can.
Okay. And this is a hard one for me because I would like to be proven wrong on this. And please, if you're watching, please feel free to share your comments on this because I'm one that I think he has been a great manager at Fulham Football Club. And my whole thing is I would like him to sign a new contract, but I'm also thinking of it in this term. Can he take Fulham to where you and I, where the people listening and watching want us to be? I've been told time and time again, Fulham can't get into Europe. And I'm going to say, yes, they can. They just need, as you said, the right tools and the right manager and the right attitude to get them there. If other clubs can do it that are around us, why can't Fulham do it? I won't accept that they can't do it. I cannot accept it. But the question is, can Marco take us there? And I'm starting to have serious doubts because he refuses, as I'm putting up here, he's unwilling to change the formations during the game. I mean, he doesn't. What if something's not working, Tony? I'm so used to a manager in other sport that I follow changing it. If you're going to continue to just bang your head against the wall, you're going to get the same result. He continues to do it. He just changes players around. I'm going to tell you a coach that outcoached him at Craven Cottage last season. And it infuriated me. And it infuriates me to tell you this. It was Maresca. Fulham were winning that match. Maresca changed things at halftime, Tony, and it changed the game. When have you seen Marco say, you know what, I got to change this. I got to really change what we're doing to change the game. He changes the players. He brings on reinforcements. But does he really change how Fulham play? It's do what we do. It's an old adage that we would always say about the Pittsburgh Steelers. Teams figure that out. Once he is figured out, Tony, then it's like a chess match. They have they're taking advantage of a move. What's the counter move? And there really is a counter move. That's my issue, Tony. How do you feel about the fact that he always sticks? You've said this to me many times. Why doesn't he play Raul and Rodrigo together? Why doesn't he go two up front? Tell me a time he's done that recently.
Yeah, look, again, it's the frustration is, Russ, right? And we have to take the emotion out of it. We're all of us are emotionally invested in the football club, right? Because ultimately we all want the same thing. We want Fulham to be successful. We want them to be, this team that's competing at the best level, which, to a degree they are, but we want to push on. We want European football back at the Cottage. But the harsh and brutal reality of it is our squad and our individual players are just not as good as people think they are. Collectively as a defence, our defence is not good enough to get us into Europe. That is the brutal reality. I don't care what anybody says, but, a back four of Tete, Robinson, Anderson and Bassi is not going to get you into Europe. That is the reality. Certainly not the way that Marco Silva sets us up and wants us to play. He's got this block in his mind that he needs to play with two holding defensive midfield players who, to a degree, do their job relatively well.
Right.
But Sanderberg and Sasha Lukic offer absolutely nothing going forward. Nothing. You got 0 goals coming from those two players. You might, in the off chance, get a 1 goal from them a season or whatever, but they contribute absolutely 0 going forward. Right. And that is one of the big issues. To play 2 up front, Marco Silva would have to change the formation. and obviously change the personnel. And, the bigger question is, do we have the squad to play a 3-5-2 or a 4-3-3 or a 4-4-2? There's question marks around that. Are they good enough to do it? We saw on Friday night how, inept Harry Wilson was. I'll say it again. Harry Wilson is not a starter for Fulham. He is that player that you need to drag off the bench when you're chasing the game or need to change something different, because that is the player he is. He's an impact player.
Well, I'll give you a change, because this is it's not a change in formation. It was a change. So he was forced to take off Lukic. I said I wasn't going to talk about the match, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the match because it goes to this.
Yeah, you have to.
Brings on Kearney. Kearney makes an incredible difference. Now, obviously, we could talk about the situation with giving up the second goal. A lot of that's on Kearney, right? But beyond that, all the other good things he offered, instead of having Lukic and Berga going forward, made Fulham so much more dangerous. Tony, why does he continue to go with these two players that offer you nothing going forward? It's driving me a little crazy. You and I have talked about this on and again. You bring on Kearney, we look like a different team. Would you agree with me on that?
I would agree with you on that. Yeah, absolutely. Because Kearney is a footballer that is, brave on the ball, wants to get forward, plays forward football, and ultimately is always looking to try and break lines and get in behind. Unfortunately, you can't legislate for the goals that we conceded, Russ. And ultimately, they were poor goals. The first goal is just poor defending. It's just poor. And ultimately, that is the problem. We've kept one clean sheet, I think, in our last 18 games, Russell. There is the underlying fundamental biggest problem. We can't keep clean sheets. And you can't win football matches or enough of them if you don't keep clean sheets. And that's with playing with two holding midfielders. Now, if you took out those two holding midfielders, what would that look like defensively? Because our back forward gets so exposed maybe at times that we'd never keep clean sheets. So that is the problem. You've got to look at the fundamental issues. And I'll say it again. Bassi, Anderson, Tete, Robinson, they can all do a job at this level. And they can be competitive and they can do things to a degree. But if you're looking at a 38-game run over the course of a season, collectively, they are not good enough. And that is the reason why we are where we are and that we finished where we finished last season, because of the inability to defend and the inability to keep clean sheets.
Okay, very good there, Tony. And I agree with everything that you said. And it's frustrating. Like I said, as individuals, they're okay, but as a collective, not good enough. And I'm not going to disagree with you on that. Let's just continue our discussion on Marco, because I wanted to bring this up, because this is one thing that actually has been a hallmark of his going way back. It takes so long for, say, a new player to break into his starting 11. And you're even with a situation, like you said, with Jonah, the young Swedish striker. He can't even get on the bench. Yes, he got on the bench here, but it was out of total necessity. He had to. I mean, it would have been insane if he didn't, but doesn't end up playing him. Is this about Marco just liking his players, Tony? Or is this just stubbornness, or a combination of both?
I think it's a bit of arrogance, ego, stubbornness. I think it's a combination of everything, Russ, is the ultimate truth. Look, at the end of the day, whether Marco wanted him or not, it's irrelevant. He's at Fulham Football Club, right? He's here. The fact of the matter is, Muniz and Raul were not fit. They were our registered two centre forwards, not available. You brought in a 19-year-old centre forward from Bayern Munich who is rated very highly. Marco Silva came out and said he's not ready physically, not ready for the physicality of the Premier League. At the end of the day, Russ, he's a striker. That's the position that he plays in. So why are you trying to put a square peg in a round hole, right? By putting Harry Wilson or Iwobi or whoever in that position, Josh King, at one point we were playing, looked like we were playing two up front,
right?
In that system to make a point. And actually, you've got a player there that's on the bench who, give him an opportunity, give him a chance. He's not going to do any worse than what we saw, is the honest, brutal truth. And then moving back onto that, you've got Kevin and Smith Rowe, who are in desperate need of minutes and game time, and at some point have to be given the opportunity to play because they're too good not to be playing. And they're getting 20 minutes here, 15 minutes there. And actually what you're doing is having a detrimental effect on both of their development because they're not getting enough playing time.
Right. And I think Smith Rowe still has not played 90, correct?
Correct.
That is crazy. Think about that. He still hasn't played 90. He's been at Fulham now. This is his second season. And then you have the Kevin situation. And listen, we could argue about the decision to bring him in. And,
Russell, we can't judge him. Really can't judge him until he's had a run of games, right?
Of course.
You can't judge any player until he's had 5 games at least to see what he's able to do or not. You can't judge a player coming off a bench in the howling wind and the pissing rain and expect them to come on and, and pull up trees. It's not realistic. What's realistic is take out one of our holding midfield players, put Smith Rowe in there with Josh King, put Kevin in on one of the sides and give them 5 games and let's see what happens. That's what needs to happen, Russ.
But he's not going to do that. And you and I both know. And that goes back to our discussion. It goes back to everything we're talking about. I understand the frustration of recruitment. We've gone all through that. Not having the right players. I'm not going to disagree with any of that to get us to Europe. But you also have a manager that is, as you said, arrogant and just stuck in his ways and will play a player for the sake of playing because that's who he's picking. That's just the way he does it. It's his way or the highway. It's Marco's way. So that's what's frustrating because I think there are times where he should think outside the box. But this goes back to our conversation. To end the show, this is to me what it's all about, Tony, why Fulham are where they are. I think I've come to the realization at the end of this show, twofold why Fulham are where they are. It is Marco is too conservative, afraid to make mistakes, and will not go out of his comfort zone. So he is way too conservative, and the Cons are as well. They are risk averse. What Fulham Football Club is risk averse. They don't want to take risks, so they play it safe. That's why we're mid-table. That's why we're hopefully good enough to stay in the Premier League. But now with everything going on, we could be dealing with a relegation battle. Yes, I said it. But they want us to be risk averse, and that has a ceiling to it. That's why we don't get into Europe, Tony. They don't take chances.
I think Marco Silva, I said it and I'll say it again, is too afraid to go and win a football match. So he'd rather set us up to not lose rather than be brave and fearless to go and win. And I'll say it again. And in answer to Chris's question about do I think Silva has no say in the club's transfers? No, I think he does have a say. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the Khans that probably have the final say in terms of what they want to invest their money in and how they want to spend that money. And so when you've got that, that sort of frisky sort of situation, it's very difficult to get things over the line. And that is the situation where I think that we are. But until Marco Silva changes his mindset in terms of how he approaches football matches, Russ, I don't think we're going to move any further forward than what we are. And you're going to continue to see a very inconsistent Fulham. Now, don't be surprised if next week when we play Arsenal that we go and get a result there, because that is what Fulham do. That is the Fulham that we're seeing. That is the Fulham that we're watching. But, I think people need to understand that the next 3 or 4 games are really, really important. Really important, because you know what it's like, Russell. If you get on that steady, slow decline and losing matches, it's very difficult to pull yourself out.
That's right. I agree with all that, Tony, and I don't want to go there, but we have to have a discussion on that. But again, why I wanted to do this show, and I think what really brought me to do this, one, I told you this, and I'm telling everyone that is listening and watching, after Friday night, I've not done a post-match show. I don't know if I'm going to do a post-match show. I was so upset after that, Tony, you and I spoke. And I'm just telling everyone, I had no feeling of wanting to do a show. This morning, I felt a little bit different, but I wanted it to be about something that bigger. And this is much bigger. But I'm glad that we're talking about this, because when you look at the last two matches, which, Tony, they could have gotten something from both of those matches, even if they're on the road. They are indicative of Fulham's time under Marco Silva on the negative. I've seen this movie too many times. Both of these matches, capitulating, I've seen it too many times. To get into Europe, you can't do that. That's why we're not in Europe. We don't take risks, and we also continue our patterns. We are predictable, Tony. That's what frustrated me so much. What happened Friday night was predictable. We go up, we give up a goal, and we let someone take over a match, and his name was Semenyo. And we don't have anyone like Semenyo. Okay, we don't. The last person we had like Semenyo, his name was Mitrovic. We don't have anyone like that can literally take over a match. That guy can. I'll be honest with you, I kind of blame Bernd Leno for the goal, but it was still a great strike. Okay, I think he could have done better. But
you absolutely hit the nail on the head. That the more worrying and pressing issue right now is the way that Fulham are capitulating defensively, and we saw it against Aston Villa, and we saw it again on Friday night. And if we turn up against Arsenal and defend like that, then it's going to be a very long and difficult afternoon. And yeah, look, it's not good enough for us. And ultimately, it's on Marco Silva now to address those issues. You know, it needs to be on him. Castagna is not the answer at right back. I'm sorry, he's just not good enough defensively. Yes, Leno, you know, but Semenyo should never have got in that position for Leno to be in that position.
That was right? On Castagna. That was on Castagna.
The second goal,
I should say it. That's more on Castagna.
Yeah, but the second goal, again, poor from Kearney's got to do better in that situation. But the back four, a bit deep, too deep in my liking, need to come out and press that ball a lot quicker. Great strike, can't take it away from him, but I think it could have been avoided. And then the third goal just basically summed it all up, being hit on the counter like that and what have you. But it's not good enough for us. That's 6 goals we've conceded in 2 games, with really the opposition not really causing us any major problems.
I think that's what's so frustrating.
Yeah. So something needs to change. Something needs to change. And that's on Marco Silva.
Right. And Tony, if you would have told me against Aston Villa at Villa Park and playing Bournemouth at Vitality, and we would be in these matches and at times looked like the better side at times, or had a chance to win both of these matches, and then it goes south like that to 2 teams that did not outplay us, in my opinion. I'm talking about really outplayed Fulham. That's what's frustrating. If they were like destroyed, that'd be one thing. When we went to Bournemouth a couple seasons ago, they really just took us apart. That wasn't this match, okay? Same thing at Villa Park. It wasn't this match. It was not. But we are the masters of our own demise. That's what's frustrating. Fulham are the masters of their own demise. That's what I come out of this. And they don't take risks. They're not defensively sound enough, and it adds up to a mid-table team. Hopefully, as I'll say one last time. Tony, great show. I hope you enjoyed it. And I want to thank everyone that is watching live. I want to mention, I'm really sorry that I can't right now. It's for whatever reason, go live on X, but I'm glad that we still had a ton of people comment today. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, unbelievable. And really good to, get people's thoughts and ideas on it. And like you said, look, moving forward, things do need to change. Fulham need to, sort it out and get it right. I don't, since the Leeds game, I don't think Fulham have actually played particularly well, Russ. I think it's been dour football. We've had moments that have been okay, but actually in terms of overall performance, in terms of dominating possession and have real foot on the game, I don't think we've been anywhere near the levels that we should be. And it hasn't been good enough. And, Silva's got this time now over the international break to look at it, to address it, and to start giving some players that need game time minutes. And that means Smith Rowe and Kevin getting into this Fulham side and start to play, because I think it will make a big difference.
And we started the show before we go with the quote that you mentioned to me. And what's frustrating about Marco is that Marco, again, is has this issue of playing Smith Rowe and King together. And I think that's also part of this. It's like he is set in his ways. You know, why can't you play them together? I don't get it. I watched in preseason this summer they played together. Why can't they play together, Tony? I don't get. Anyways, great show, and just I want a major thank you to everyone, and of course, Chris. Sorry about your club yesterday. Sorry about that. Why do you have to lose to that team, Chris? Why? Why do you have to do that? That was actually very upsetting to me. That made my weekend even worse, Chris. I was hoping Liverpool would win. I can't believe I'm saying this. You made it worse. Anyway, sorry, Chris. I'm just kidding with you. Let's hope the Patriots win against Buffalo. How about that? All right. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Cottage Talk. He's Tony Gold. I'm Russ Goldman. Thank you as always for watching and listening to Cottage Talk, part of the TalkSport Fan Network.